Season 1 of The Walking Dead opens with Deputy Rick Grimes getting shot on the job and falling into a coma. When Rick wakes up, he finds the hospital deserted and the world has been taken over by zombies, which everyone refers to as walkers. In search of his wife, Lori, and son, Carl, Rick befriends a man named Morgan Jones and his son, Dwayne. Morgan explains to Rick the rules of walkers, like their heads needed to be destroyed to be killed and that if you're bitten by a walker you'll turn into one. Eventually, Rick leaves Morgan and Dwayne to head to Atlanta in search of his family. In Atlanta, Rick is ambushed by a horde of walkers and rescued by a man named Glenn. Glenn is off to scavenge in the city to collect supplies to carry back to some other survivors he meets along the way, where he invites Rick to join them. Another part of the crew includes Merle, whose very unpredictable and rather menacing behavior obliges Rick to cuff him to a pipe when the walkers overcome Rick and Glenn's crew and leave Merle behind. Glenn then returns Rick to his camp of survivors, which comprises Merle's outcast brother, Daryl's sisters Andrea and Amy Kindly, RV owner Dale T-Dog, the Pelletier family, which consisted of wife Carol, abusive husband Ed, and young daughter, Sophia, and much to Rick's surprise, his best friend Shane, his wife Lori, and his son, Carl. Rick has a happy reunion with his family, but unbeknownst to him, in the time since his coma and presumed death, Shane and Lori had developed a romantic relationship and Shane had become a surrogate father to Carl. Lori breaks things off with Shane, but tensions remain high. A horde of zombies attacks the camp, killing many survivors, including Amy and Ed. Rick decides the best decision is to lead the entire group to the CDC facility in Atlanta. Upon their arrival, they find it completely abandoned except for a single survivor, Dr. Edwin Jenner. Dr. Jenner explains more about the walkers, that there was no hope for a cure, and that everyone on Earth was already infected by the zombie virus, and would turn into a walker upon their death. Desperating to survive, Jenner decides blowing up the CDC with everyone inside. Rick leads his group to safety as the CDC building blows up with Jenner inside. Season 2. Throughout Season 2 of Walking Dead, the scenario reminds the readers of Rick finding a permanent home for his survivors. In the process, Sophia gets missing off Carol's daughter. Searching for the missing girl Sophia in the woods, Carl gets accidentally shot by a hunter. The hunter, Otis, facilitates Rick crashing Carl to the farmstead of the veterinarian Herschel Green. On their mission, Shane and Otis head towards gathering the medication needed to help save Carl, but en route, they encounter a horde of walkers. Shane shoots Otis in the leg and throws him off towards the walkers in order to give himself time and space to withdraw with the medicinal supplies. Shane tells the others that Otis gave his life willingly, and Herschel uses up the supplies to save Carl's life. The other survivors are making themselves at home on Herschel's farm and begin fortifying his fences to keep the walkers at bay. Herschel is reluctant to allow this large group of strangers to stay on his farm with his family, but relents if they follow his rules. Daryl starts to get comfortable in his new family, and an incredibly close friendship with Carl. Lori realizes that she is pregnant, but isn't sure whether it was Rick or Shane, making matters even worse between the two former best friends. Glenn falls in love with Herschel's daughter, Maggie, but their affair has to remain a secret from her father. When Glenn finds out that Herschel kept a barn full of walkers on his property, Herschel reveals that they all were his family and he wanted to save all of them with a cure. This angers Rick, but it drives Shane further into insanity, who then opens the doors of the barn to let all the walkers loose. Shane and the others kill the walkers one by one. The last walker out of the barn is Sophia. Herschel is devastated over the events at his farm and flees to a local town bar to drink. Rick and Glenn find him and persuade him to stop drinking and return home, but they are then attacked by a group of violent strangers. As Rick, Herschel, and Glenn flee, one of the strangers, Randall, is injured. Not wanting to leave the man behind to be killed by walkers, Rick takes Randall back to the farm. Things quickly spiral into chaos over what to do with Randall. The strangers group was violent and would come looking for him, putting everyone at the farm in danger. But if they let Randall go, he will lead them right back to the farm. Dale, who's kind-hearted but very firm at times, urges everyone to shut up and to let things alone. When the walker kills Dale, Rick finally decides to show respect for his life by allowing Randall to leave alive. Luck is not with Rick, because Shane takes over and sneaks Randall off of the farm where he murders him in the woods. When Rick finds this, he challenges Shane. Shane subsequently holds Rick at gunpoint, believing that his best friend couldn't have done the difficult things required to ensure their group's survival. Rick is made to stab Shane to death. When Shane turns into a walker, the young Carl is forced to shoot him in the head to save Rick's life. The sound of the gunshot attracts a horde of zombies to the farm, and the survivors are forced to flee. Many of Herschel's family members are killed, but he and his daughters Maggie and Beth escape with Rick's group. During the chaos, Andrea is separated from the others, but saved from the horde of zombies by a mysterious hooded woman named Macon who wields a deadly katana. You know, the survivors of the zombie apocalypse could use a lot of help repopulating the earth, and luckily this video's sponsor Adam and Eve have the perfect fix. Adam and Eve is America's favorite adult store, and they've been in business for over 50 years. In that time they've satisfied over 20 million customers. They've got completely discreet shipping and a 90-day no-hassle return policy. Plus 20% of their profit goes to fighting the spread of HIV around the world. So head over to adamand.com and use promo code RECAP at checkout for 50% off one item, plus free shipping. Thanks again to Adam and Eve for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the recap. In Season 3 of The Walking Dead, 8 months have passed and Rick's group decide to set up Season 3 their new home in an abandoned prison. During the clearing process of the prison from walkers, Herschel gets bitten on the foot, though after amputating it to stop the infection, his life is saved. In case a prison alarm goes off, the walkers swarm causing chaos within the prison walls. T-Dog self-sacrifices to save Carol, whereas Laurie, Maggie, and Carl find themselves cornered in a boiler room. Right when Laurie is about to give birth, Maggie has no choice but perform a C-section on Laurie. Laurie dies however. Carl, having no alternative, shoots his mother in the head to stop her from getting up and acting as a walker. As the walkers are pushed out and the survivors gather again, Rick is heartbroken to find out that Laurie has died and names their new daughter Judith. Another group of strangers, led by the siblings Tyrese and Sasha, also stumble upon the prison and are given permission to stay to join Rick's group. For a little while, there is real peace at the prison, and Glenn proposes to Maggie. Meanwhile, Andrea and Macon find the heavily fortified town of Woodbury, led by a man known as the Governor. Macon is highly suspicious of this leader, but Andrea is quickly won over by his charm. Also living in Woodbury is Merle, who survived being handcuffed during a walker attack by cutting off his own hand. As Macon begins to investigate the governor, she finds that Merle has been assigned to bring walkers into the town alive so that a resident named Milton can experiment on them. Other walkers are used as public gladiator fights for the entertainment of the residents of Woodbury. Feeling disgusted by what she has learned, Macon decides to leave Woodbury, but Andrea stays behind. While Macon is searching for a new house, Merle kidnaps Glenn and Maggie, who were hunting baby supplies. She then found her way to the prison and informed Rick that Maggie and Glenn had been kidnapped. Rick joins Daryl, and they head toward Woodbury with Macon. They rescue Glenn and Maggie there. Fighting the governor, Macon eventually thrusts him in the eye with her sword. As they escape, Daryl is stunned to find out his brother was still alive, and Merle decides to leave Woodbury with them. The governor then decides to declare all-out war against Rick's group at the prison. As Andrea foolishly tries to make peace between the two groups, both sides prepare for battle. Rick, Carl, and Macon head to Rick's hometown to arm up. There, they encounter Morgan. In the time that has passed since Rick last saw him, Dwayne has died, and Morgan has gone crazy from his loss. Rick tries to convince Morgan to join them, but he declines. When Andrea finally understands that peace is not going to happen and that the governor intends to slaughter everyone in prison, Andrea flees Woodbury to try and warn her former friends. The governor captures Andrea and locks her in a room with Milton, whom he fatally stabs. only a matter of time before he reanimates as a walker. Meanwhile, Rick reluctantly concludes that they can give Macon to the governor to avoid any further violence and tasks Merle with delivering her to Woodbury. Earl, having seen the positive change the group has had on Daryl, changes his mind and lets Macon escape. Instead, Earl sacrifices himself to lead the Walker horde against the governor's men, killing many of them. As the season is coming to a close, the governor and his army attack the prison. Rick's group fights back and defeats their enemies, forcing the governor and the remnants of his army to flee. When the surviving members of the Woodbury army refuse to continue the fight, the unhinged governor murders them all. Having defeated the governor, Rick and his allies head to Woodbury where they discover that Andrea had been bitten by Milton. She gives a tearful goodbye to her old friends before killing herself to avoid turning into a walker. In Season 4 of The Walking Dead, The Survivors in the Prison, Season 4 now including the remnants of Woodbury, have been living peacefully for many months. When a deadly flu starts spreading throughout the surviving people, Carol kills several of the infected and burns the bodies to prevent the illness from continuing to spread. Carol has become stronger-willed and more pragmatic since her husband's and daughter's deaths, but still, Rick cannot help to exile her from the prison since he understands her reasoning. Meanwhile, the defeated governor meets Chandler family, Tara, Lily, and Lily's daughter, Megan. The governor hides his past from the family and develops a relationship with Lily. When the governor runs into his old right-hand man Martinez, he discovers that Martinez has gathered his own devoted army and arsenal. The governor then kills Martinez and leads his new army toward the prison, in the hopes of taking it over to secure a safe home for the Chamblers. Outside the prison, the governor captures Macon and Herschel, threatening their lives if Rick doesn't abandon the prison. When Rick instead offers coexistence, the governor executes Herschel and orders his army to storm the prison gates. Finally, war breaks out between Rick and the governor's armies as walkers start pouring into the prison in the fight between them. In all the chaos, Megan gets bitten by a walker, and the governor is forced to put her down. As Rick and the governor fight each other in a brawl, Macon stabs the governor in the fight until he dies. Lily is overcome with grief from the pain the governor has been dealing to her family. She kills the governor before being eaten by walkers. The survivors at the prison are all forced out of the home they had taken for themselves, and separated from each other. This faction of disparate group all begin seeing signs leading to supposed sanctuary known as Terminus. Along their respective roads to Terminus, Carol is made to kill a young girl who kills her own sister for the latter to become a zombie. Beth is kidnapped by the unknown strangers, and Glenn travels with Tara Chambers before running into former soldier Abraham Ford and his girlfriend Rosita Espinosa, who were escorting scientist Eugene Porter to Washington, D.C. to deliver what was supposed to be a cure for the Walker outbreak. In this final episode, as the season comes to an end, Rick, Carl, Macon, and Daryl reach Terminus, where Gareth, its leader, warmly greets them with a request for them to surrender their weapons. Rick soon gets a feeling that something was off about Terminus before they were held at gunpoint and locked inside a train car where they find out all their other friends had been taken, except Carol and Tyrese. But Rick wasn't concerned about the latest predicament of his group, as Terminus had just messed with the wrong people. In Season 5 of The Walking Dead, Carol and Tyrese helped save their friends from Terminus. Season 5 who, it turns out, were cannibals. During their attempt at escape, Father Gabriel finds them and has locked his congregation inside his church, during which all outside were consumed by walkers. Sometime later Rick kills Gareth, leader of the Terminus group, and manages to force Glenn, Rosita, and Abe to go after Eugene on for Washington, D.C. to presumably save his longtime nemesis. While doing this, Rick, plus Maggie and a pregnant Tara escape Terminus. During the rumpus between members of their various groups, on the way to D.C., Eugene reveals to the group that he was lying when he said he was a scientist and knew the cure in order to get stronger people to protect him. Rick's group finds Beth kidnapped by a group of survivors who have occupied an abandoned hospital. Rick captures members of the hospital group to trade for Beth, but during the exchange, Beth stabs the hospital's leader, Dawn. Dawn instinctively shoots Beth dead, prompting Daryl to kill Dawn. Rick's group leaves the hospital, devastated, despite Eugene's lie being exposed. the group decide to continue on their trek to DC. Along the way, tension and fatigue grows as they slowly run out of food and water. When Tyrese is bitten by a walker and dies, the group's spirits are further dampened. Eventually, the group are approached by a stranger named Aaron, who delivers them food and water and explains he is from a walled-off safe zone known as Alexandria. His community had food, water, and even houses with electricity and running water. Despite Rick's fears that Alexandria would be another Woodbury or Terminus, the group hesitantly goes with Aaron. In Alexandria, the group meets the community's leader, Deanna Monroe, and are forced to turn over all of their weapons. Despite Rick's suspicions, Alexandria is exactly as Aaron promised. The community was so safe and secure, in fact, that most of its residents were completely unaware and unskilled in dealing with walkers. It seems that members of Rick's group start settling well into their new home, and Carl even starts dating one of the teenage residents of Alexandria, Enid. Unluckily for Rick, though, he continues to feel paranoid, and discusses ways that they could take over Alexandria should things go awry with the similarly skeptical Daryl and Curl. Meanwhile, Daryl starts joining Aaron on his recon missions and chanced upon Morgan, who followed a map sent to him by Rick to search for his longtime friend. When Rick finally learns that Pete, the surgeon of the town, is having an affair with his wife Jessie and sons, Ron and Sam, Rick sees Deanna in order to find a solution. Deanna doesn't want to punish Pete, because he is an amazing surgeon. Rick decides to take the law into his own hands, confronts Pete, and engages in a highly publicized brawl. Deanna orders Rick to back down, but instead he pulls out his gun and threatens the entire Alexandrian crowd by saying they were too weak and complacent to survive. Recognizing that Rick has turned into a nemesis against all of his friends based in Alexandria, McCon has no choice but to knock Rick out. Meanwhile, a council is deciding if Rick should be exiled from Alexandria, where an intoxicated, irate Pete meets Rick and brandishes McCon's katana. Calming Pete down, Reg ends up killing his wife's husband in the chaos. Distraught over Reg's death, Deanna finally gives Rick permission to execute Pete, just as Daryl and Aaron arrive with Morgan. Season 6. In Season 6 of The Walking Dead, a now Zen-like Morgan helps his old friend Rick realize that his hardened survival skills needed to be softened now that they were living in a peaceful community. As Rick settles back into something approaching a normal life, he falls in love with Jessie. Maggie meanwhile discovers she is pregnant with Glenn's baby. Of course, things couldn't get more peaceful because outside the walls of Alexandria trouble is brewing. Firstly, the villainous survivor group known as the Wolves attack, and Carol takes the lead to repel the attack. Second, an enormous herd of walkers approaches. Despite their best efforts to divert the herd, Alexandria's walls quickly become surrounded by walkers who manage to breach the community's defenses. As the walkers invade Alexandria, the citizens inside are quickly overwhelmed with no chance of fighting back. After being bitten by a walker, Deanna sacrifices herself to buy time for the others to escape. Rick douses his group in the blood and guts of a walker to help them blend in and move through the other walkers undetected. Walking hand in hand through the walker herd, the young Sam begins to freak out, attracting the walkers to him. As he is devoured by walkers, his mother Jessie refuses to leave him behind and is also swarmed by the undead. Jessie's death grip on Carl forces Rick to chop off the arm of his new lover to save his son. In return, Jessie's surviving son Ron holds Rick at gunpoint. McCon kills Ron, but in the process, Ron's gun goes off, shooting Carl in the eye. Rick is able to give an inspiring speech to rally the surviving Alexandrians, while Daryl leads a team to draw the walkers' attention. And with that, the Alexandrians are able to fight through the night and kill every single walker. 2 months later, Rick has assumed leadership of Alexandria and begun a romance with McCon, who takes on a motherly role toward Carl and Judith. Rick and Daryl then meet Jesus, who introduces them to another community known as the Hilltop, led by the squirrely Gregory. Jesus further explains that Negan was the leader of the villainous group known as the Saviors who extorted supplies from the Hilltop under the threat of an attack. Daryl encounters 2 escaped Saviors, Dwight and Sherry, who steal his motorcycle and crossbow to help augment the supplies lost due to the walker attack. Maggie makes a deal with Gregory that she and Carl will kill Negan and bring an end to the Saviors in exchange for half of Hilltop's supplies. Rick's group sets out to find and slaughter Saviors at all of their compounds. On one of their runs, Maggie starts going into labor pains, and the group tries to rush her to Hilltop to get her into medical care. On their way, the group discovers that all routes have been blocked by the Saviors, forcing Rick's group into a Savior trap. As the Saviors capture everyone and hold them at gunpoint, Negan finally reveals himself, wielding a barbed-wired covered baseball bat he nicknamed Lucille. Negan explains that someone from Rick's group needed to die as revenge for the slaughter of countless Saviors. In Season 7 of The Walking Dead, Negan exacts his revenge by brutally beating Season 7 Abraham and Glenn to death. Negan explains that Alexandria worked for the Saviors now, and to ensure their further cooperation, he takes Daryl hostage back to the Saviors' home, known as the Sanctuary. While imprisoned, Daryl learns more about the inner workings of the Saviors, where the non-soldiers were forced to perform labor to earn supplies or comfort. Negan also takes many wives, often by force. Daryl also discovers that Dwight and Sherry had returned to the Sanctuary, with Sherry forced into becoming one of Negan's wives, and Dwight having half of his face burnt as punishment for his escape attempt. Since Daryl has left Dwight behind, he finds himself one of Negan's trusted lieutenants, including Simon. However, Sherry manages to set Daryl free before leaving in pursuit of her own way of life. The first time that Negan ever visits Alexandria, he takes away all of their guns and almost all of their medicine. Rick has finally come to terms with defeat and makes his community to submit to Savior's dictates. The majority of the community is not interested in the idea, which also includes Rosita, who gets into a relationship with Deanna's son, Spencer, and assigns Eugene the task of developing live rounds. When Negan returns, killing Spencer, Rosita fires a bullet Eugene designed and used the smuggled gun to fire at Negan but instead strikes Lucille. Negan then kills another Alexandrian and kidnaps Eugene. Eugene quickly becomes compliant with Negan's authority and puts his brain to work to earn a position among Negan's most trusted council. Having received a pep talk from Mikan, Rick finally becomes spurred to take a stand against the Saviors. Alexandria makes a pact with Hilltop and another community known as the Kingdom who had also been enslaved by the Saviors. The Kingdom is ruled by the strange King Ezekiel, who has a tiger by the name of Shiva as his pet and has an instant fascination with Carl. Coming under many layers of doubting and protective barriers, Ezekiel gradually wins over Carol and they start a romance. Alexandria also receives guns from the community Oceanside, all of whose males were massacred by the Saviors. Rick then forges an uneasy alliance with a group known as the Scavengers, led by the mysterious Jadis. And the final piece to Rick's alliance is Dwight, who offers to act as a double agent to help take down Negan from the inside. As Rick's alliance of communities prepare to go to war with the Saviors, several people grow impatient and attempt to take matters into their own hands. Carl sneaks into the sanctuary to murder Negan, and though he fails, Negan is impressed by the teenager's bravery. He develops an interest in the youth and takes him back to his home. Sasha too sneaks into the sanctuary to assassinate Negan, but gets caught, just like Carl. When Negan arrives at Alexandria to crush the rebellion before it even starts, Scavengers turn against Rick and join the Saviors. Negan tries to make a deal to get all the supplies of Alexandria by offering Sasha to them, but he soon realizes that Sasha had killed herself and turned into a walker. That distraction provides a window of opportunity for the Alexandrians to turn the tide in the fight against the Saviors and Scavengers. By the time Hilltop and Kingdom soldiers join in, Negan's army retreats. In Season 8 of The Walking Dead, various communities in league with Rick prepare Season 8 for the final battle against the Saviors. The people in Hilltop oust the spineless Gregory as their leader and put Maggie over them, who sets them out to war. During several other battles against the Saviors, many lose their lives. Aaron's boyfriend Eric is killed during a fight between the Alexandrians and the Saviors, while numerous people of the Kingdom's army, including the tiger Shiva, are slaughtered in another fight. The biggest loss to Rick's group is his son, Carl, who was bitten by a walker while bringing a doctor named Siddiq to Alexandria. Rick and Mikan are sad by their son's death, but the unyielding hope from his body motivates them to carry on with the fight. Meanwhile, many saviors under Negan's command begin to grow tired of the horrible conditions at the sanctuary. With witnessing all the atrocities that Negan's faithful army commits towards their enemies, a number of saviors led by Alden decide to abandon Negan and join Hilltop. When Rick finally convinces the scavengers to turn against the saviors, Negan sends Simon to kill one scavenger as punishment to keep the others in line. Finding Negan's punishment too light, Simon instead slaughters every scavenger except for Jadis. When Negan learns of Simon's actions, he kills him. The stage is set, as the end of the season approaches. To finally put the war to a close, Eugene leads a factory of workers as they craft ammunition for the army of the Savior. When it is discovered by Negan that Dwight was in fact a man who was passing information to Rick about the Savior's plan, he began feeding Dwight bad information. Such bad information resulted in Rick's army walking into a trap head-on. As the Saviors surround Rick and his allies and open fire, all of their guns backfire due to Eugene sabotaging the ammo. Rick's army fights back against the Saviors, defeating the villainous army. As Rick and Negan brawl in a fight to the death, Rick comes out victorious, slicing Negan's throat. Rick decides to allow Siddiq to save Negan's life, knowing it's what Carl would have wanted. As the different societies start rebuilding during the aftermath of the war, Morgan leaves for a new life. Dwight searches for his wife Sherry. Maggie is left furious with Rick for deciding to spare Negan, and decides to take revenge for killing Glenn. Season 9. In Season 9 of The Walking Dead, 18 months have passed since the defeat of Negan and the Savior Army. The communities have come together and rebuilt during a period of mostly peace. In the last 18 months, Carol and Ezekiel take on the teenage orphan Henry, Aaron takes in the young Gracie, Maggie has delivered her and Glenn's baby, which she names Herschel. Gabriel starts dating Jadis, and Negan remained a prisoner in Alexandria. Tensions begin to brew because some of the old saviors still support Negan's ideology and abhor the lifestyle they are forced to adopt. The spineless, egotistical Gregory tries to have Maggie killed in order to earn back his role as leader of the Hilltop, though Maggie quickly catches him and has him publicly executed. Jadis begins trading residents to a mysterious new group with a helicopter in exchange for supplies. Rick's decision to keep Negan alive also creates fractures amongst the communities, as Maggie wants to see him dead, as do the women of Oceanside, who begin killing former saviors as revenge for the previous murders of the Oceanside men. During construction to repair the bridge to the Hilltop, these tensions amongst the communities come to a head. Due to an accident, Aaron's arm has to be amputated, and bitter saviors lead a riot at the construction site, which attract walkers. Trying to lead this herd away is Rick, thrown from his horse and critically impaled by the rebar in his chest. Bleeding from his wound, Rick sacrifices himself by luring the herd towards the bridge to blow them up all at once. As all of Rick's friends and family mourn his death, Jadis finds him alive, and contacts her mysterious allies with the helicopter to come pick them up and save Rick's life. 6 years later, the various communities have fallen out of contact with each, though they continue to grow and rebuild on their own. Macon is still raising Judith, who has now grown up to be a brave 9-year-old who befriends the captive Negan. There is also Rick Jr., known as RJ, whom Macon was carrying at the time of Rick's presumed death. Rosita has been impregnated by Siddiq, but she breaks up with him and starts dating Gabriel. Carol has married Ezekiel and becomes the queen of the kingdom. She continues raising Henry with him. Maggie and Herschel, her son, had left the communities to join another traveling group being led by Georgie, who was a female, and for 6 years Daryl has survived alone with the company of a dog he called Dog, finding nothing but search for the lifeless body of his old mate, Rick. Judith saves yet another group consisting of Magna, Yumiko, Luke, Kelly, and the deaf Connie. From a horde of walkers she brings this new group to Alexandria. Meanwhile, Jesus is murdered when a walker pulls out a knife and kills him. As it turns out, a new evil group of humans known as the Whisperers had started donning masks created from the faces of walkers to help them camouflage amongst the Walking Dead herds. Macon leads a team that captures a young Whisperer named Lydia, who happened to be the daughter of the Whisperers' leader, Alpha. As Lydia is taken to the Hilltop for questioning, Henry begins to develop romantic feelings for her. Lydia had been abused by her mother and wished to stay in the normal thriving communities instead of returning to live with the violent Whisperers. Meanwhile, the kingdom organizes a massive trade fair between the communities. Ezekiel hopes that such a fair would bring the groups together again. In the trade fair, leaders from the various communities vote to fight together and defeat the Whisperers. Meanwhile, Alpha had secretly infiltrated the fair where she disowns her daughter and begins luring unsuspecting victims into a trap. As Daryl, McCon, Carol, and Yumiko leave in search of their missing people, they are confronted by the Whisperers. Alpha shows Daryl a massive walker herd, threatening to lead them to the various communities if anyone crossed into the Whisperers' territory. As Daryl's group departs, they find